What's up, everybody? Doug here, and we got another solo episode that I'm gonna keep in the can for a week where I can't record with Leo because of the summer visitation. But the good news is that this next coming up week is the last week of summer visitation, so the schedule's not going to be thrown off anymore. There's probably still going to be a solo episode here and there, but it won't be as common, I don't think. So uh, before we get into it, I do want to say that I do have a little stop that I had to make about maybe 10 to 15 minutes into this drive. So I'm going to pause the recording, and then when I come back, we'll finish it off. And yeah, so this episode is going to be a dive into another topic that I'm really uh, deep into, which is handheld gaming. If you haven't listened to the other episode that I've done that's kind of similar to this, I did a deep dive into live service gaming, and I'm actually kind of toying with the idea of doing a sequel to that. Just trying out different live service games and seeing how I feel about them. So, just something along those lines. It probably won't be for a little bit because right now Emily and I are we're in Shadowbringers in our Final Fantasy 14 playthrough, and Dawn Trails in Walker and Dawn Trails after that, and then we also do have, excuse me, we have World of Warcraft's expansion coming out in August or September. I think it's September actually. So who's to say when I'll get into all of that? But in the same vein of diving into handheld gaming and what handheld gaming means to me, I Oh well, I gave it away there. I'm talking about what I meant to say was talking about live service gaming, what it means to me, handheld gaming, and my origins into handheld gaming, and why I was always gravitated more towards that than I was to having the console experience and doing it that way. So it really all started with the original Game Boy Color. I got the it was the purple Game Boy Color, and I mean honestly, there was never really a game besides the mainline Pokemon games that I played because I was too young to know what was what, and I had consoles, but you know obviously consoles the main drawback is you can only play them when you're sitting in front of a TV screen, and the big plus of the game like handhelds is you can play them wherever you are. And the Game Boy Color, the first game that I got with it was Pokemon Blue, and I've told the story about the Pokeballs and thinking they were pies, all that good stuff. And I just remember, having a packet like going on road trips, and I would, have my parents would get me like a pack of AA batteries, and I would just play. I played Pokemon until I eventually beat the game, and really thinking about how I always felt like I was born in the wrong era because I wanted to, be just a little bit older so that I would have a friend group that I could trade Pokemon with, and, use the link cable and, do the Pokemon battles with friends over the link cable. And I was never in that. So, like, I don't think I got like an Alakazam or a Gengar until much later in the Pokemon, what's the word I'm looking for? Like I didn't get it until it was more readily available to get those Pokemon without trading, or probably like the GBA or the Nintendo DS. I would say the Nintendo DS era is when I finally got into trading. But we'll get into that later. And yeah, I would just I hammered out Pokemon Blue, and then I got Pokemon Yellow for it was a birthday present, and I played through that, and it was such a completely different experience because the third and Pokemon games kind of lost this, where they always had something that was different in the third games, like in Crystal and Emerald. But Pokemon Yellow, it really changed the experience where you got a different starter. You got Pikachu, and you could catch all the starters, and you were fighting Jesse and James instead of like the regular Team Rocket grunts, and all the sprites were different, and it was just a completely different experience. And then you move on into Pokemon Silver and Pokemon Crystal, and I didn't really ever play any other games I didn't. What I mean says I didn't own any other Pokemon games. That makes sense. I always had the Pokemon. Like sometimes, like I would go over to a friend's house and like he had the black Pokemon trading card game cartridge, and I would play that. Or I would play. I think he had he might have had it, or I might have had it. The cartridge for what was it called? I think it was like Pokemon Puzzle League. That was a big deal. And Tetris, the Game Boy version of Tetris was it was freaking massive. How popular that game was. And moving, I didn't really get another handheld for a little bit, but purchase wise. But we're gonna talk about my strange experience with the Sega Game Gear. Uh, that's going to be next up, but I'm coming up on that little stop I was telling you guys about. So I'm going to end the recording here and we'll come back in just a little bit. All right, I'm back. So, yeah, the Game Gear. I don't remember where I got this thing from, but I had this Game Gear and it had like a bunch of games with it. I remember there was a Sonic game and I think there was a Ninja Gaiden game too. I'm going to have to look into that. But, there was something happened as soon as I got it was a I think somebody gave it to me, but for some reason it got damaged like in the handoff. I don't remember what happened, and the I think it was just you could just see the bottom of the screen. But I thought the Game Gear was so cool because it was like this big massive handheld for like in comparison to the Game Boy, because the Game Boy was like this little thing you fit in your pocket, and the Game Gear was not that from what I remember. And I played the Sonic game over and over again. Like I died all the time because I didn't see anything from like the top half of the screen. But yeah, that not really the biggest thing in my handheld gaming career, but it was something that I remember playing a lot of. And then going from there, the next handheld was the game. No, yeah, the Game Boy Advance, which what this was where gaming really started to click with me because again I was it was a Pokemon machine for sure, but it was I want to say it was the last console to use the last handheld to use batteries. I think everything past this point had a rechargeable battery in it, but I just remember Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. I think what I had done with that game is I had collected cans and I traded the cans in for money. And back then, you could get a lot of money doing that. And I got enough money to buy. I got Pokemon Sapphire and playing through that game and it just being everything you wanted from a Pokemon game. And I don't remember where I got this game. It was like some kind of Barbie game, but I had it. And my parents was like, "Well, you got this game, you can't get rid of it." And I didn't know about GameStop at the time, and I never played it. And one day there was a girl. My parents were friends with this other couple, and they had a daughter, and she had this game, and she wanted the Barbie game, and she's like, "Hey, I will trade you this stupid game that I got in exchange for the Barbie game that you had that you don't want." And that game that I traded for ended up being Golden Sun. And Golden Sun, if you don't know, it's a turn-based RPG, and, and it was made by Camelot. And if you don't know what Golden Sun is, find somebody that does. And when you say the words Golden Sun in front, their eyes are going to light up because it was such a different experience for me at the time. And I played the absolute crap out of that game. I beat all of the optional bosses. I was grinding for levels. It was really the first time that I really had to grind for levels because in like the early Pokemon games, you didn't have to unless you were like doing like a Nuzlocke, which I don't even think was a it might not have been a thing when I was playing Pokemon back then. I don't remember when Nuzlocke first came into being. Oh god, yeah, excuse me. But it was such a different experience at the time. And I remember I want to say this happened in the same day. Uh, Up until then, you have to also remember that backlit screens were not the norm. I think the Game Gear might have had a backlit screen, which that would make a lot of sense. That was backlit screen, but like the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance did not have the backlit screen. And then one day, I want to say it was something. It caught me off guard. I think it was like Easter, and in my Easter basket there was a Game Boy Advance SP and a copy of Golden Sun: The Lost Age, which was the direct sequel. So Golden Sun ends on a kind of like a cliffhanger, and The Lost Age picks up after that. And I would also be interested to see like what the excuse me. I'm interested to see and what the cadence was in between those two games, because for me it wasn't that big of a deal because I played that first game, and I want to say I got the sequel like right after, so I don't know if they were already released or what the deal about that was. But having the Game Boy Advance SP was it was just a completely different game for multiple reasons. One of which being the backlit display. The second was the clamshell design, which was again I'm pretty sure it was the first handheld not only to have the backlit display but also to have the clamshell. And oh, I'm in a yawn factory today. Uh, and also had a rechargeable battery. So all of these things were like these revolutionary things because anybody, especially Pokemon fans, will tell you that whenever you went on those long road trips during the day, it was great, because you had something to do. But as soon as nighttime kicked around, you had to stop playing because your parents. There was this running myth that if you had the light on in the back seat, they couldn't see. Just know that if your parents said that, they were lying to you. And I know that because I am a parent now, and my kids tried to turn on the back light in the back seat, and it was just an annoying light in the car. I could see perfectly fine, but I just said, "Oh yeah, I can't see." So just know that if you are in the back seat and you want to turn a light on, and your whoever's in the front seat says they can't see, that's a lie. Uh, but yes, I mean the Game Boy Advance SP, it fit better in your pocket, and around that time, Pokemon Fire Red came out, which is a remake of Gen One, which was just insane. And I actually just allegedly downloaded Fire Red again, which begs the point: why won't Nintendo put those games on Nintendo Switch Online? Like, I could understand if we were still in the era where Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games were not on the service, but they are. Those games are on Game Boy games, and Game Boy Advance games are on Nintendo Switch Online, and Pokemon Stadium, and maybe even Pokemon Stadium 2 at this point, are already on Nintendo Switch Online. I do not understand like how easy it would be for them to get the easy W and say these games are available on Pokemon Switch Online and they're compatible with Pokemon Home. Easy win. I don't know why that's not a thing. They were on the virtual consoles for the 3DS, but that's beside the point. That's neither here nor there. So, Game Boy Advance SP, I mean, there were so many games that I played from that era. Be it from the Pokemon games, Pokemon Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, uh, I think that was the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon was actually I can't stop. I'm so sorry. Uh, that was the first Pokemon Mystery Dungeon. The Sword of Mana, that was a big one. Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. That game just completely revolutionized what and introduced me to turn-based RPGs. Well, tactics RPGs, I should say. And actually didn't play the original Final Fantasy Tactics until much later. We'll get into that. Uh, but I remember getting that. I don't even remember what made me pick that game up. I just saw it at the store and it was like, that looks cool. And I just got home and I started playing it. I didn't stop playing it until bedtime, I don't think, that night. But the game franchise that really stuck out with me, besides Golden Sun and Pokemon, was the Fire Emblem franchise. At the time, uh, I think it was just called Fire Emblem, but it was the first localized Fire Emblem game, and it had Lynn and Hector and Eli Wood. I think that's how, or Elliewood. It was like one of those pronunciations, and just putting a ridiculous amount of hours into it, just because the box art looked cool. Because back then, as a kid, you kind of just picked games based off of, the art was cool, and Fire Emblem being this game where it was a tactics based RPG. Uh, if your units died, they were gone forever. That was just like a heartbreaking thing. Uh, and I wish I would have played it at the time, but I did not play Advance Wars at the time. I don't know why I didn't do it, but it's one of those things where I wish I would have, and I'm thinking about downloading the remake of 1 and 2 for the Switch. Uh, and then, what was another? The Yu-Gi-Oh games for the Game Boy Advance. So, if you've never played a Yu-Gi-Oh game, the main draw of these physical releases were that you would buy the game and they would, I don't know if they still, because I don't think they're still making these Yu-Gi-Oh games, but when they did, when you would buy the games in the case for the game, it was always three. There's three cards you would get. They were limited edition cards, and they're always really cool. And I remember a lot of times I would just buy Yu-Gi-Oh games well, I would get my parents to buy Yu-Gi-Oh games just so I could get the cards in them. And Yu-Gi-Oh is going to come up a lot in this series, probably up until the PSP days. And I there were so many of those games, and it got to the point where I just had it was like a little Yu-Gi-Oh tin. Like they still have them now, but it's like little special edition tins that come with like a booster packs and some cards. Uh, and I just had a Yu-Gi-Oh tin where I kept all my Game Boy Advance cartridges, and I had quite the collection. There were RPG. It was mainly RPGs. Now I think about it, I didn't play anything other than RPGs. But then I had like little random games like I think there was a port of Tony Hawk's Underground 2, and that was like my first taste of disappointment because like man, this game sucks. It is not built well for the Game Boy Advance. Uh, and I just played so much of the Game Boy Advance SP. And I remember for the GameCube, this is, getting off of, handheld gaming, but they had the little attachment where you hooked it up to the bottom of your GameCube and you put a disc in, and then you could plug in your Game Boy cartridges and play them that way. And that was just such a cool thing because at the same time, you were plugging your cartridges into your TV basically. And then whenever you're done, you save the game, you took the cartridge, put it back into your Game Boy, and you're good to go back on the go. And when you think about it, that was kind of the, I mean, that was the Switch way before the Switch was the thing. And there were even things like, I think, yeah, Pokemon Stadium had some kind of, and probably Coliseum as well, XD Gale of Darkness, where you could plug in your Game Boy games and you would get special rewards. I don't remember what it was. I think you could like import games. You could like import your Pokemon from the Game Boy games into Stadium. I think that was a thing. And that might have been. I think you can maybe. I'm probably remembering this wrong, but I think you could unlock Pokemon in Stadium just from plugging in your Game Boy to it, which was always a really cool thing. And it's something that we're going to get further into with the PSP because there were certain things there as well, where you had attach the PSP to a PC or a PS3 and you get rewards. I'm trying to think if there's anything I want to talk about before we move over into the Nintendo DS days. And I think that was it. And the Nintendo DS was when Nintendo really started doing some really weird stuff that was gaining my attention. And oh, the Ninja Council franchise. I can't believe I almost forgot that one. Uh, yeah, Ninja Council. I played a lot of that on the GBA. So, moving over into the DS days, that was when I remember trying to convince my parents that I needed a DS because they had brain age, and I was like, "Look, if you just get me this thing, I could be furthering my studies." And they knew that was a lie, but like it was always a thing. I was like, "No, look for real, I could be learning things, or look at this Nintendogs game. I could be taking care of a virtual dog." Uh, and really, I had no interest in playing both these games. I just wanted my foot in the door. because it was such a novel concept. It was this handheld with two screens, and at the time that was completely unheard of. And one of them was a touch screen, which I had seen Palm Pilots, but I don't even think smartphones were a thing yet. Touchscreen touchscreen devices were just not a readily available thing in 2006, 2005. Uh, but I just remember I finally convinced my mom to buy me a DS, and I want to say the first game that I got with it was whatever Yu-Gi-Oh game was out at the time. And again, I only wanted it because of the cards. And from there, I want to say I got Pokemon Diamond because I thought that Dialga was cool, and he was. Uh, but I don't remember really getting too deep into the DS bag for a while anyway. But like I've mainly played those games, and then if you remember the DS, the OG DS was very bulky, and it didn't really. It was a very bulky system, and the hinges were very breakable. And when mine broke, I remember going along me like, look, I'm pretty good. I'm a pretty good kid, and this is what helps me stay good. And it's broken. So do you think that there's any way that maybe, just maybe, that I can get this new thing in the DS Lite? Which, if you don't remember the DS Lite, this thing was slick. This was a beautiful handheld. And I remember my mom finally relenting and saying, "Okay, we can go get you this thing." And that's when I really started to dive in to the world of the DS. And allegedly, I found out about the R4 cards. Uh, if you don't know what an R4 is, it's basically what they're trying to do with the Nintendo Switch custom firmware now, where it was a DS cartridge with with a little hole in the top where you could put a micro SD card in, and any game that that you had fitted into this SD card would it would pull up in a menu. You play any DS game that you wanted, and this was my introduction into modding and custom firmwares and homebrew and stuff like that. And allegedly, from there, I played all kinds of games. I played the Call of Duty ports they were doing because if you remember, they did these really, when you think about it, insane ports. They had Modern Call of Duty 4. They had Black Ops. I want to say they had World at War. I know that Modern Warfare 3 had a port, but I don't think Modern Warfare 2 did. I had to look into that. Uh, and they had a bunch of Naruto games. They had the Ninja Destiny franchise, which I was a huge fan of. Uh, if you remember, it was basically a portable version of Clash of the Ninja, which was a fantastic fighting franchise on the GameCube. And Nintendo did a really good job of taking all of their IP they had at the time and putting them onto the DS in some way. I mean, you had Metroid Prime Hunters, which was at the time it was like the first foray into portable first person shooters. And it was awkward to control. It was this thing where you had to, I want to say you moved around with the D-pad and you used the touch screen to be like your camera, and you kind of had to like grip it. It was like a claw grip where you had like your two middle your your pointer finger and your thumb finger was holding the stylus, moving the camera around, and you had to kind of like use your middle finger to touch the trigger. And all of those first person shooters controlled that way. But there was like a bunch of these weird, obscure-ish first person shooters, like Dementium, which is like a survival horror experience. Uh, there was this first person shooter called Moon that was pretty cool. There was one, I think it was called like Core. That was a cool one. And then there was also, what was it called? I'm completely blanking on it. Moon, Core, Dementium. Maybe I'll come back to it. Oh, there was a port of the original Resident Evil 1. It's called Deadly Silence. and you could play the game as it was originally intended to be played, or you could have like this weird, slightly redone mode where there were sections of the game where you use the touchscreen to like fight off crows and stuff like that. And there was even a really weird co-op mode where you would play the game with another player, but like the other player would just be like it was like a little dot almost like on the screen. So like you wouldn't see another player. And there were Castlevania games on the GBA and the DS, but I never really got into those, and it's something that I'm looking into getting into now. But there were really good sequels to Wind Waker. It was the same graphical style, but you would play it with a touchscreen, which I really hate because now I can't go back and play those games unless I go back and find a DS somewhere. What was another game on there? The Phoenix Wright franchise that was on there now, but they are thankfully Capcom has those readily available. There were sequels to Final Fantasy Tactics. There were sequels to Final Fantasy 12, which is a game that I want to play. Uh, really, if you could imagine it, there's probably a franchise. There was a weird Pokemon Conquest game where it was like a Dynasty Warriors Pokemon crossover, but it played like Final Fantasy Tactics. Just a bunch of really weird and obscure stuff that you just wouldn't think of. And I think that's a good spot to end the episode for now. And what we're going to do with this is I'm going to go with a part two, maybe even a part three, depending on because uh, next episode is we're gonna start talking about the PSP and the 3DS and the PS Vita. And depending, I mean, I could talk your ear off about those, and then going into the Switch and the handheld PCs, uh, maybe even talk about laptop gaming because that was a big thing for me as well. So that's where I'm going to end it for now, and I will see you guys next time. I think this will be a good 2 to 3 parter. Thanks for listening.